Over 6,000 murders took place between January and March of 2023 in South Africa. About a third, roughly 2,629, were committed with a firearm. The issue of gun violence is not uncommon in the Rainbow Nation. It has become a multifaceted and present concern, casting a shadow over communities and threatening the nation's safety. Now, from violent crimes and gang-related activities to incidents of domestic violence and firearm theft, the impact of guns on the fabric of South African society is profound. Gun violence in South Africa transcends these mere statistics, leaving behind a trail of shattered lives, lost potential, and immeasurable grief for families and communities affected by this preventable tragedy. Behind each crime lies a story of human suffering, underscoring the urgency to address the root causes and prevent further bloodshed. So what could be the reason behind the pervasiveness of gun crime, and what are the solutions? We'll find out here on The Square. I am Kemini Amano. You're welcome. Joining our gathering today are Lesiba Tabuhale, who is a South African Police Union spokesperson. He's joining us from Pretoria. We also have Martin Hood, who is spokesperson for South African Arms and Ammunition Dealers Association. He's joining us from Johannesburg. Gentlemen, you're welcome to The Square. I do want to start with you, Martin. Let's talk about, the specific problems that you believe are plaguing the current firearm registry in South Africa and why it's now considered dysfunctional, given the backdrop that, the firearm registry has been identified as one of the ways of curbing the gun crimes that have been identified as very pervasive in South Africa.
In 2004, we completely revamped our firearm legislation, and we made it much, much more difficult and strict to obtain firearm licenses. The laws themselves are not bad laws. The difficulty that we have is that the administration of them, the implementation of them, has become chaotic. And I think that is where we agree with most role players. Doesn't matter what part of the spectrum you come from, all the role players seem to agree that the administration of our firearm system is chaotic. Now, when you don't have proper control over firearms, and what I mean by that is where you don't know where they are, when you don't know who has them, and you don't know who is using them, then that is a recipe for increased firearm violence. And that's the problem that we have with our central firearms registry, because their information is corrupt, their database is out of date, their understanding and their implementation of the legislation is corrupt, it is incompetent, and it is inefficient. And then we have the real core of the problem, and that is that the administration is still paper-based, whereas we live in a digital world. And the police have failed, even though the High Court has ordered them to do so. The police have failed to convert to a digital system. With a digital system, we would have far greater control over firearms and ammunition, and that is a very important crime control tool that our police and our courts need in order to curb firearm violence.
Indeed. Lesiba, talk to us. Would this assessment be correct about the registry? And for you as a police officer, tell us how the inefficiencies of the registry affects how you're able to tackle crime. Lesiba, I would seem you're muted.
Am I audible now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Before we talk about the Central Firearm Registry, I think it has to be clear that there's a lot of challenges that we have in terms of firearms, because the ones that we refer to through the Central Firearm Registry, it's either are those that the applicants are applying for those firearms to say they want to own guns, or there are those that were then caught as exhibits, meaning that they were then confiscated by police. But before we could even touch that part, it is a fact that there's a lot of illegal firearms that are in circulation within our country. And the high rate of murders that we are seeing in South Africa is clearly informed by the fact that those illegal firearms are the ones that are being utilized by criminals to terrorize our communities. So the first step is for the police. They have a responsibility to ensure that there are means that are implemented to remove illegal firearms from the hands of criminals, because before you can try to manage illegal firearms, make sure that they are removed clearly from the hands of the criminals. Therefore, then from there, then now you come inside the police to deal with the administration thereof. The current system that is working is that when an illegal firearm has been confiscated from a criminal, it goes through the manual process where it gets entered into a register that we call the SCP-13. It gets registered there as an exhibit. From there, it follows other processes where it will go for ballistics and so on, in order to prepare for the courts and so on if there's a suspect who has been arrested. The reality is that, you know, when you follow the trail thereof, the challenge comes there that we live in the 4th Industrial Revolution, where the South African Police Services, they've got what we call technology management services, we call it TMS, where they have got the capabilities to make sure that there is a technological advancement where firearms can be administered. The National Commissioner should be able, sitting in Pretoria, to check on how many guns are there in Inanda Police Station in KwaZulu-Natal that have been in the system and so on. Which state are they at? Did they go for ballistics? Are they still seated in the police station?
Right. So Lesiba, you know, just to make sure that we are on the same page, isn't that what the electronic tracking system should be able to do?
That is what we are referring to say, if the police, indeed, they have such a system that is linked to the 4th Industrial Revolution, anyone can be able to see them, can be able to see, like giving an example.
And that will make your job easier as a police officer or investigator on any crime.
Yes, unfortunately, as we speak now, the manual work, the manual process that is functioning, and they recently even outsourced that function to give it to a private company, which we don't agree with it, because they've got the capabilities within the subs to make sure that they can do that, because you cannot take the issue of firearms and outsource it to anyone outside there. So we are saying that they've got the capabilities, they must do the electronic part of it and be able to monitor it correctly and make sure that even the data there is a data integrity, everything that has to do with firearms is being kept indeed in a very strict manner, because firearms kill people. Firearms are not toys, they need to be taken seriously.
Very well. So Lesiba, I just want to roll back a little so that you clarify your point for me, because I struggled a little bit to understand you when you talked about illegal firearms. It is a fact that there are also quite a huge number of illegal firearms in South Africa. But my question is, and perhaps, you know, with this question, you can clarify that point for me. If the police cannot put a lid on tracking legal firearms, which are through the system, how then do you hope to go after illegal ones that you have no idea where they are in the first place, unless they end up in crime?
Well, when it comes to illegal firearms, remember, it is the police who are giving the licensed firearms to the owners or to the applicants who apply for them. Whereas when it comes to that, our expectation as a union, it is for them to be able to trace them, because they've got the records there. How they administer those records, that is where now they have to have innovative ways to make sure that through technology they are able to administer those. But the biggest crisis, it is the illegal ones that are killing our people day in and day out. Because if you don't get rid of those, we'll continue to have a firearm or gun control crisis in this country, and people will continue to die. We'll continue to see the cash in transits that are so high in this country, because those very illegal firearms are the ones that are being utilized by criminals to terrorize our communities and even our businesses in this country.
Indeed. Martin, I'd like to hear your thoughts on, you know, the role illegal firearms play in the spate of gun violence that South Africa experiences, just before we move on to other matters.
So I think, first of all, Lesiba has made a very good point, and it's an unfortunate point, and that is that the lack of control over exhibits at police stations, in particular firearm exhibits, has led to a leakage into the illegal market. There's been a number of very high-profile cases where large numbers of firearms have been stolen from police stations, and there was a more recent one, in fact, I think it was on the weekend, where the police storage facility in Silverton was broken into and firearms have been stolen. So there is a leakage issue from the police themselves. But I think what's more important is that this spills over into the criminal justice system, because good police officers are doing good work in trying to recover illegal firearms. And let's be clear, an illegal firearm is a firearm that the person who has possession of is not the license holder. So we have a system in this country where a firearm is licensed to an individual, and only that person can possess and use that firearm. So we have many, many firearms that have become illegal by virtue of the fact that they have been stolen, or they have been sold, or they have been taken out of police stations. The problem is that when we recover these stolen firearms and they are found to be in possession of a criminal, we cannot secure convictions because the data integrity of our registry is not reliable. So the courts cannot accept evidence relating to who is supposed to be in possession of a firearm without it being successfully questioned by defense attorneys. That is the real issue, because until we start putting criminals in jail and convicting them and giving them maximum sentences for illegal possession of firearms, the fact that the law is not properly enforced acts as a way of encouraging people to use illegal firearms. So the real issue here is the fact that the data integrity does not allow the police and our prosecuting authority to secure convictions. We're not going to deal with the issue of illegal firearms until people are put into jail and remain in jail because they have illegal firearms.
Right. Let's see. But so I want to talk about this leak within the police service. I mean, what's going on there? What light can you shed on that?
In every organization, like it is a case in the subs, you would have some rotten elements. And we must say as a union that there's a lot of good police officers. I'm glad that my fellow panel member also concede to that fact, that the jails are full in South Africa because good police officers have done their job. There are some cases. There's also a Prince Louis case, which is being used as one of the cases where a police officer, took firearms and he gave them to criminals, and they were utilized to go and commit even more murders, to be utilized in more crimes. So that is just some of those isolated cases, which when they are being discovered, they are being dealt with. But it does not cloud the whole issue that there are good police officers who are doing their job. But we clearly need solutions to say, how do we then deal with the issue of illegal firearms in this country? Because if we don't get rid of them from our streets, removing them from our streets, we'll continue to see criminals continue to win. And in a country, a democratic country like South Africa, where the rule of law is the one that is above all, then
so let's start this way.
To control that is a problem.
Indeed. So that solution you talk about, let's start from within the police. What steps have been taken to prevent or plug these, these leaks that exist among the police service? Do you know?
Remember, everyone, to become a police officer, you take an oath, meaning that you are going to do what is expected of you in terms of the law, not anything outside the law. The first thing is for one to remember the oath that they've taken, to say, I've taken an oath to serve and protect the inhabitants of the Republic and their property in terms of the Constitution of the Republic. And from there, one of the solutions that we are seeing is that the subs, they have to make sure that the management of illegal firearms that are coming, more especially as exhibits, to say they are managed appropriately, more especially linking it clearly with the technological advances, so that anyone linking it, making sure that firearm can go out, it could be able to be visible in the system to say something foul has happened. Without such interventions, we will continue to see some cases, you know, coming up like that, and everything seems to be clouding the good work that the police are doing. But moreover, by removing those illegal firearms, we need a firearms unit to be re-established, because the issue of illegal firearms to be removed from our streets, it needs people who are specializing in that very same work, people whom, when they just see a firearm, without even going back into the system, they can just tell, because they are experts in the field, to say these are illegal firearms. People can have them, that unit to be re-established, working intelligence-driven, closely with crime intelligence. We will then be able to make sure that these illegal firearms are removed. From there, then we come in-house and deal with issues within the South African police services, improve the technological advances, and make sure that the management of firearms, or the record keeping thereof, and the movement of those firearms that are considered to be exhibits, it is traceable up until it goes up to the destruction level. If that does not happen in-house, or that service continue to be given to outside service providers, we see disaster. Because sometimes there's issues of tenders where people are not paid accordingly, then they close the tab. We have seen with forensic science laboratories, there were issues of tenders where people were not paid. Then they end up closing the tab. They are not able to process forensic evidence. So we need to deal with those issues. SAPS has to be up to par in terms of their technological advances when it comes to administering illegal firearms and the applications of illegal firearms that the applicants are bringing to the police stations.
Right. So let's stay on technological advancement. And Martin, you were telling us earlier that SAPS had missed the deadline to digitize, the tracking system. There was a court ruling that SADA secured, and SAPS has not been able to live up to the court order. What happens now?
So I think, first of all, we need to look at the situation holistically. We need to not just say that we need to sort the problem out. We need to look at it in a more sort of comprehensive way. The reason why we as an industry want digitization is because it will improve the quality of records. So it starts at application level. A person who applies must provide the correct information. That information must be verified, and that's a problem in itself, because the police don't have the resources or the means to verify something as simple as an address. And that's critical, because the police need to know where a firearm is going to be kept. They need to know where the individual person is living, so that they can go and they can check that person if necessary, and they can check that firearm. So it starts at a very basic level, and that's why we want this digital system in place, because we want the information to be collected, we want it to be processed properly, we want it to be stored properly, we want it to have integrity, because with that integrity, the police and our prosecuting authority can take information from our computer systems and say, this person has committed an offense, or this person has not got their firearm, this firearm is illegal because it's in the possession of somebody else, and so on. We can take that information and we can submit it to court, and then we can secure prosecutions. And by way of securing prosecutions, we can create a respect for the laws, we can create a respect for the police, and we can send a message to the people of South Africa, and to criminals in particular, that if you do misuse a firearm, if you commit a crime with a firearm and you are caught, you are going to get convicted. Under our current circumstances, because of this lack of digitization, criminals are not getting convicted. So they go to court and they get acquitted because the data integrity is not there. So we need a system from the ground up that can process and collect and verify the information. Without that, we're not going to have proper control over our firearms.
So with regards to creating that electronic system, now that SAPS has missed the deadline, do we see SADA taking any further action?
So what we've done as an industry is we have taken the police back to court again, because we now need to have revised timelines. On the one side, we understand that there has been delays, and I want to emphasize the fact that there have been delays has come about as a result of the police themselves. They have created delays. They just have not complied with a court order, and they have deliberately not complied with the court order. But we have to be realistic. And that means that the police do need time to implement a new system. The problem is that they've awarded a tender now to do the new system, but there's no time frames. So we don't know when it will start and we don't know when it will end. So we have just served more court papers on the police to get a judge to actually direct the police by when they must implement this system. And that is the next step. And unfortunately, and for reasons best known to our National Commissioner of Police, instead of saying, let's sit down and work out these timelines, they're actually opposing the court application. So they've created another, instead of saying, let's work on a solution together, which should be the way that we solve this problem, they're actually creating more delays. So we believe that there are elements within the police that actually don't want control over firearms because they are actively resisting implementation of a digital system.
Indeed. I do want to stay with you, Martin, just for a little bit before I move on to Lesiba. Lesiba had mentioned earlier that there is need for a re-establishment of the illegal firearms unit. How important do you think that will be alongside an efficient registry?
I think it's critical. So Lesiba has made a very, very good point that one of our previous national commissioners disbanded specialized units for reasons best known to that national commissioner. And a great deal of skills have been lost. And there are one or two very small specialized firearm units, and they are completely overwhelmed with work. They know how to investigate criminal syndicates. They know how to investigate corrupt firearm dealers. They know how to investigate police themselves who are leaking firearms into the illegal market. But they are a very small group of units that are completely and utterly under-resourced and simply cannot cope. So yes, Lesiba is absolutely correct. We need specialized units where police officers are trained to deal specifically with firearms and firearm-related crimes. I would even go one step further and say that we need to establish special courts to deal with firearm crimes, where prosecutors and magistrates are skilled in the Firearms Control Act, because one of the challenges that we also face, and just by the way, I'm a practicing attorney, so I work within our criminal justice system. One of the challenges that we face is that many prosecutors, and we're talking about relatively low-level prosecutors, they don't know the firearms laws. So they don't prosecute a matter properly. And that also leads to people being acquitted when they should be convicted of serious crimes. So we need to look again holistically. We need to look at specialized police units. Indeed. We need to look at specialized prosecutors, and we need possibly to even have a specialized court as well.
Very well. When we come back from this break, we would look at some of the solutions that have been suggested for, mitigating gun violence in South Africa. One of which has been the idea of banning civilian ownership of guns in the country. We'll find out from Lesiba if that is a good idea when we return. Don't go away. Today, our focus on the square is about, an effective central firearm registry in South Africa and how it could help curb gun violence in that country. Still with me are Lesiba Thobahale, who is a South African Police Union spokesperson. He's joining us from Pretoria, South Africa. We also have Martin Hood, who is spokesperson for South African Arms and Ammunition Dealers Association. He's joining us from Johannesburg. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your patience. Lesiba, I was saying earlier that one of the solutions that has been peddled throughout the entire conversation around curbing gun violence in South Africa, which has also been championed by Police Chief Becky Clele, is banning civilian ownership of guns. As a police officer, what are your thoughts about this?
We do not agree with that approach by the minister to say civilians must not own guns. When criminals themselves have guns to come and attack the civilians. There's also those who have an opinion that the police themselves must not take their firearms home and so on. I think it relates to the same. So it is a fact that we cannot agree to that, because a police officer remains to be a police officer. Even when they are off duty, they can always place themselves on duty. They cannot go and say, let me go fetch a firearm. So civilians, they take firearms, their own firearms, in order for them to protect themselves against criminals. Maybe what the minister is supposed to be saying is to say that he should be telling us about plans of disarming criminals. He should be telling us about plans of removing illegal firearms from criminals before he could come and even speak about the civilians not owning guns, because they are doing that to protect themselves, their interests, their families, and even their businesses. And we know the high level of hijackings. We have seen one of the filling stations that Land Rover was hijacked there. Those guys, they waited for that driver at the garage, and then they took that car from him using the very same guns. So if civilians themselves will be the ones who are unarmed, yet criminals are armed, there is no balance that is taken between the two. And even the minister speaks about the issue of amnesty, which we are against the issue of amnesty, because this amnesty, those who surrender those illegal firearms, they happen not to account. If those firearms, they killed people, they've committed crimes, no one is being held to account on the issue of amnesty that gets to be declared by the minister. Yes, you want to remove firearms from those criminals, but they will give you one, they won't give you the rest of the firearms that they are having. You need to have a permanent solution, but not come and tamper with civilians and say that civilians must not own guns. We don't agree with that.
I see. And if I were to take a guess, Martin, you'd agree with Lesiba on this point?
First of all, I applaud Lesiba for his attitude, because he really has set out the issues about civilian ownership of firearms. It's a complex of firearms. It's a complex issue, and many of us have a great deal of sympathy for police officers who operate in a very high-risk environment in this country. And they need to be able to own a firearm privately, because they, being high risk when they're not on duty and if they don't have their service firearms, then they also need to be able to protect themselves. Many other citizens also find themselves in high risk situations. People who own businesses, people who live in isolated areas that are not serviced by the police because of a whole load of resource reasons. There are many, many people that need firearms for protection, but it's more complicated than that, because we have a very large private security industry in this country, which works with and supports our police service in many instances. And they also need to have firearms because they protect even government installations. So we have all of our airports and many other national key points that are protected by private security, not by the police. And then on top of that, we have a very large hunting industry that employs probably about 120,000 people, according to some research done a couple of years ago. So we have many people who are involved with firearms in other industries other than simply for the purposes of self-protection. So it's not an easy solution to simply say take away civilian firearms, because as Lesiba said, it doesn't take away the criminals' firearms. Lesiba very, very accurately said, when you have an amnesty, the criminals don't come and hand in their illegal firearms. And that's the real problem that we have. It's the criminal use of firearms, not civilian ownership of firearms.
Right. So when we talk about a holistic approach to curbing the proliferation of guns in South Africa, I know we've mentioned the registry. Lesiba had talked about dealing with illegal firearms. Are there other things that could be done in the short to medium term to ensure that, you know, while we're building that registry, proliferation is also checked at the same time? So some sort of a balance between gun control measures and, you know, the need to also own guns at the same time. Lesiba. Right, Martin, you start with that, and then I'll come to Lesiba later.
I think that, first of all, this concept of proliferation is wrong. It's a term used by organizations that want to remove firearms. The fact is that we have a firearm ownership regime in this country, and the law provides for it. And people simply, they use their legal rights to obtain firearms. One of the principal drivers behind our civilian ownership of firearms is concerns about crime. So unfortunately, until we deal with crime, and that involves socio-economic solutions, it's not a question of just saying we should or shouldn't have firearms. The problems go far deeper than that. Until we deal with our socio-economic issues, and until we deal with our South African Police Service in terms of resourcing them, training them, dealing with corruption, giving them good leadership, giving them good management. Until we deal with issues like that, we're not going to deal with the issues of crime and firearm-related crime. So there aren't short-term solutions. We need to actually knuckle down and start dealing with the issues that have been acknowledged by everybody for the last 15 to 20 years. So there's no knee-jerk, quick-fix solutions here. We need a proper social solution. And unfortunately, that comes from government, and it comes from good leadership within the police.
I guess so, and perhaps good policing as well. Lesiba, we'll take a bite out of this question. What would be your response to that? Creating that balance, you know, and now I'm careful about using proliferation because Martin says that, well, it may be used in the wrong sense.
Yeah, no, we clearly agree with Martin. It comes to that. We also need to make sure that even our security companies that have, you know, legal firearms to use to do their job, because they do also safety and security, like the police are doing, giving support to the police. Those firearms that they use, we need to make sure that, you know, SAPS has quite the capacity to monitor and really go and check on whether they are on par, are they being used correctly, are they only using legal firearms and so on. But in dealing with the crisis of the firearms that we have, the first thing, they need to be a political will. That starts from the police ministry when it comes to gun control in South Africa. Coming to the issue of the National Commissioner, we need to make sure that the proposals that we are putting ahead that speaks to the issues of gun violence, to say that digitize how firearms are being administered, starting from those that are being brought through by the applicants, and even issue of firearms that are illegal in this country. But further to that, removing guns from the streets, illegal firearms from the streets, that should be, it's not something that needs to wait for years. It's not something that people need to see, let's sit and plan how it could be done. Interventions can be done, correct, through the proposals that we've put of the establishment of specialized units, which clearly can just bring immediate solutions whilst we are still dealing with the CFR, whilst we are still dealing with digitizing the issue of the registry when it comes to firearms. We can just deal with removing illegal firearms so that we know that we are only worried about managing legal firearms through the CFR system in South Africa.
I see. Martin, I do want us to talk about one solution that Gun-Free South Africa proposed in their latest report. They had talked about devolution and privatization of the administration of the CFR. What are your thoughts about such a move? And really, what's your understanding of that?
So our court, our constitutional court, has said that firearm ownership is a privilege, it's not a right. So that means that the police retain a discretion whether to approve a firearm license or not. So any process that requires a decision must have a degree of discretion in it. Now, if it were possible to move the issue of licensing away from the police into some form of private body, that private body would have to have guidelines, quite strict guidelines, on how to exercise the discretion to grant a license. And I think that's the first challenge that we have, because that discretion must be exercised in a legal way. Then, of course, you can only devolve that decision-making process to a private body if the information has integrity. So, although the solution appears attractive to privatize the firearm licensing system, even Gun-Free South Africa and their associate, the NGO that prepared the report, they acknowledge that it may not be so simple as to privatize. Right. And I agree with that, because again, it comes back to this issue of data integrity. You can't privatize anything unless you actually privatize the whole process, including the collecting and evaluation of all of the data. And unfortunately, I think that is a process that would, it would be too cumbersome, it would be too time-consuming and too expensive for a private body at this stage to do in South Africa. So although the suggestion is attractive, I don't think it's a practical solution. I don't think it's appropriate to our environment, because we need a discretion. You can't have an automated process. You can't simply put information in and get a particular result out. It needs someone to make a final decision. So I don't think it's a solution.
Right.
I'd like to add that, for example, in the United States, they do have an automated system where you put information in, and it's called an instant background check. And if that comes back with an approval, then a firearm can be handed over immediately.
Right.
But the fundamental difference is that America has that data integrity. We do not.
I see. And, you know, I wonder why, because I know you mentioned earlier the inefficiencies and the corruption, you know, believed to be among, you know, SAPS personnel. But perhaps we'll leave that conversation for another time, particularly because we are running quickly out of time. Martin, before I move on to Lesiba to take us home on our discussion today, I do want to ask you, how is all of this affecting your members? You know, the inability to digitize the system so that applications move on quickly and guns are properly tracked, and just the corruption and the entire inefficiencies. How's that affecting your members?
Well, we went to court because we identified that with a digital system it would be more efficient. It's a multifaceted problem. It would be more efficient for our members to do business, but it would have the benefit of it enhancing control over legal firearms. And we took a decision 5 years ago that we wanted proper implementation of our firearms control legislation, because it was in society's best interest to have full implementation of the legislation. So it's negatively affected business, but at the same time, we have acted in what we believe is a socially responsible way. We've actually advocated better control. We went to court for better control over legal firearms.
I see. Lesiba, take us home. I can only imagine that as personnel, you get worried that you might be on the field one day and get hit by firearm that cannot be traced, and hence you don't get any justice. Is the union looking to wade in on the conversations, perhaps join SADA and Gun-Free SA and ensure that your leadership does something, and something quickly, about the electronic system, about dealing with illegal firearms in South Africa?
System, it is what we advocate for. But like we said before, that for it to be that function to be taken outside privately, we don't agree with that approach. Instead, you don't throw a baby with the bathtub. Instead, you make sure that you deal with the challenges that are there, because the challenge that is happening is that the DFOs, those who are dealing with applications in the police stations, they do everything. Everything gets sent because it is centralized here in Pretoria, where the office itself it is not in order in terms of them administering that. So that approach of dealing with digitizing everything, then it becomes better, because now you don't see a whole lot of files piled up in offices waiting to be processed by very few personnel. We as a union, we will hold hands with anyone who support the issue of saying that let us remove illegal firearms from our streets. Let us have better measures to make sure that firearms, legal firearms, are controlled appropriately, and even the process thereof, it has integrity when it comes to the data thereof. We will hold hands with anyone that comes there. We will also even hold hands with those who are saying that they are against the gun violence that is so thrive in our country, but not those who will come and say that police officers must be disarmed when they go home. That one, even with Gun-Free South Africa, we do not agree with Kirsten when it comes to that, or the members of that organization. But on other issues, we clearly, we agree with them on certain issues. But we need to hold hands together, have a dialogue over issues, look into better options, look into better solutions that we can implement in order to remedy the situation.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and insights on the subject matter. Thank you for such a great conversation, Martin and Lesiba. We hope to speak to you again some other time.
Thank you.
Thank you.